think we're already, yeah, there we go.
Welcome to Modern Seniors Podcast. My co-host Ami and I, long-term colleagues and friends, started this podcast to explore issues around aging and empowerment. How we can ensure that as we age, we retain our ability to make meaningful and useful contributions to society. Our guest today is John Lombard, who has very interesting international experiences and who's working to build. Why don't you tell us, John? What are you working on these days?
Which one?
What aren't you working on?
Got a bunch of different. Yeah, got a bunch of different things on the go. My main business is cultural capital coaching, where I do business coaching specifically tailored to immigrant entrepreneurs. So these are people who've come to Canada, started businesses, but they face, in addition to all the challenges that a regular entrepreneur faces, they face additional challenges with cultural differences, lack of networks, language, there's racism, there's many different issues like this. So I have a program that's tailored specifically for them. I'm also the director of the Vancouver branch of the Center for Inquiry, which is a national organization that promotes critical thinking, evidence-based decision-making, with our primary focus being in education and in government. So in education, promoting critical thinking, and in government, promoting evidence-based decision-making rather than based on politics. I have a nonprofit in China working with an ethnic minority group there that I still kind of work with from here. And I've got a bunch of other smaller things on the side that I'm working on, but those are the main ones.
That's a really interesting area to be in. We're talking about people who experience culture shock on top of everything else. And of course, all of us are going through what Alvin Toffler called future shock. So there's so many things piled on top of each other as we head into a technological singularity that we have no idea what it's going to be like. Do you talk about technology at all? Is that one of the things that your entrepreneurs involved in?
Absolutely. I fully acknowledge that there are major ethical issues surrounding the whole question of AI, how it's used, everything like that. However, in practical terms, particularly for an immigrant, it gives them phenomenal tools. It empowers them so incredibly. Obviously language is a major issue for a lot of them. Well, using ChatGPT, whatever they want a business plan, they want marketing materials, whatever. They let ChatGPT know in their imperfect English. ChatGPT can understand all of it and then give them stuff in perfect, flawless English that they can use. In a fraction of the time it would take them to hire somebody to do it, for a fraction of the cost that it would take to hire somebody to do it. So actually right now a huge part of my program is teaching them how to use that effectively. They want business loans, but they've never developed a professional business plan in their life, and they have to go to a bank, present them with a business plan to defend their plan. They have no idea how to do it. Well, it's not just a question of tell ChatGPT do it. Tell it, hey, I'm developing a business plan. What are the main sections in a business plan that I need? Now, what questions do you need me to answer so that you can fill that information in? I answer those questions. Do you need further information? Do you need me to elaborate on anything? Okay, you answer that. You go through this process, and then when that process is done, okay, please put together a full professional business plan for me. And they give it to you, bang, and it's a couple hours work. You can do it faster than a native English speaker would do it. So yeah, things like that. I call myself a pragmatic idealist. I'm very much an idealist in terms of what I want to accomplish in the world, but I'm very pragmatic how it's accomplished. for all the various moral, ethical concerns surrounding AI, which I fully acknowledge, and I'm actively involved in that discussion, as a businessman, if I'm not using AI, the companies that do use it are going to shove me out of business very, very quickly. So on a pragmatic level, I need to use it just to be able to survive, to make the money, to be involved in the conversation about where should AI be going. It's kind of a catch-22.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've gotten even beyond that, and I'll talk about that later, or ask you about that later. But for now, I just wanted to point out to our audience that my co-host, Ami, is going to be a silent participant this time due to some technical issues. She is writing in the comments so we can relay questions for her. And her first point is that John is looking really good today, which I have to agree with. So yes, back to technology. This is one of the themes that we are exploring in our podcast, because for many people, especially as we age, it can become a significant barrier. Now, what you're talking about is a totally different scenario where it can be a huge enabler, for example, for immigrants who want to start a business. In fact, I'm going through the same thing myself as I'm starting a couple of businesses up, and I find that I really can't imagine how I could do it without AI unless I had access to a large group of people who were willing to interact with me for significant portions of every day.
In which case, you'd still be paying a lot more money, and it would be taking longer.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Have you, in your consulting work, do you know a lot of people who are using AI to start their own businesses?
No, this is a lot of people are intimidated by it. They don't really understand it. They're afraid of it. Things like so. One of the big things I do is showing like the biggest advantage to me of AI, which most people just don't, even people who are regular users don't really tap into, is the fact that you can use AI to teach yourself about AI. Like you go on to ChatGPT. All you have to do is type, I have no idea how to use ChatGPT. Could you teach me? And it'll walk you through step by step, tell you how to do it. You have problems. Say, well, I don't understand this. It'll explain more. How do I do this? It'll tell you how to do it. It's an incredibly collaborative process if you know how to use it. It's not like pretty much anything else, any other type of technology we've had in the past. You've got the technology and then you've got learning, and they're completely separate things. Here, it's all one thing, and it's conversational. You don't have to worry about you can tell ChatGPT or whatever AI you're using. You can tell it what level of language you like. Speak to me like I'm an idiot. Speak to me like I'm an idiot, like I'm a beginner. Yeah, so I'm like my mother, who is over 80. I got her using it simply by doing this. She was completely no idea what she would do, how to use it, and never even looked at it because it was so intimidating. And I went from that to like in less than half a day, she's using it for all sorts of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ami asks an interesting question in the chat. Once the person is has perfect English, but their English doesn't match with what they're writing, can that also create obstacles?
Not really. If the only place I'd say it's an issue would be if you're actively trying to present yourself as a native English speaker, and then suddenly they discover you're not, so there's some deception involved there. But by far the majority of, like, you're developing marketing materials, you're developing a business plan. Even me as a native English speaker, I'm often hiring other people to do that for me. Interpretation, translation tools are standard today. Everybody is using them. I would say it's a bigger red flag if you are still sending people stuff, particularly in written form, which is grammatically incorrect, which has spelling mistakes, because there is zero excuse for it, and everybody knows that. You can easily use translation things, grammar check, spelling check. There is zero excuse for it. So to me, and for most people today, If they're seeing you having that type of mistake, it indicates a lack of professionalism. So no, I don't really see that a barrier at all. Yeah.
My experience with that, to be honest, is a little bit different, because when I was working as a global business developer, I would often be corresponding with people whose native language was Spanish or German or some other language. And I would always put at the beginning of my my message to them, please forgive Google Translate, because I knew that it wasn't going to be doing a 100% perfect job of translation.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was able to correspond with the people in all those different languages,
Right.
which I don't speak myself. So
Yeah.
it was a huge
And I
advantage.
think there is a little bit of a difference there as well between communicating with someone in a language you do not speak at all, as opposed to being like an immigrant in Canada who speaks some level of English, and you're just using these tools to improve that. I think there is something of a difference there. But even in regards to like a language you don't speak at all, the tools are evolving so quickly now that that's becoming a very minimal issue. In fact, I'm finding I don't use Google Translate anymore. ChatGPT does a better job in terms of colloquial communication than Google does.
Right. Now, and on the other side, you also spoke about using AI in business. And my first exposure, or my first significant exposure to that, was writing computer program, or vibe coding as they call it, using AI. And I found that it involved a lot of back and forth, as I found that there was a difference in interpretation between what I thought I was saying and what the AI thought I was saying. So the results might seem to work perfectly at first, and then I realized, no, this is not quite the approach that we want to take. And I spent actually probably a couple of months working on a program for the company I was working for at the time, and using different flavors of AI too, because I found that different types of AI, like you could use DeepSeek from China, or Copilot from Microsoft, and you would get all kinds of different flavors of reply.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I'll add in there. One of the things I teach everybody, a very, very simple thing, but it eliminates 90% of that communication issue that you brought up. At the end of every single request, type, do you have any questions or suggestions? And it will then go through, and if there's any areas where things are not clear, where there could be different interpretations, it asks you, it clarifies, it gives you suggestions for how it understands what you want. It gives you suggestions for how you can get that in a more effective way. And it doesn't eliminate everything, but it eliminates the vast majority of those issues. Just a very simple prompt I tell everybody stick at the end of absolutely every request, and it works beautifully.
I have another question from Ami, which I'll just add here. John, you've been exploring in your entire life. Tell us a little bit about what lessons you've learned about yourself and the world.
That would be multiple podcasts by itself. I think a very, very brief summary, like Neil and I were talking a little bit before this. I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian family, very, very devout Christian, went to Bible college, studied theology, went to China originally as a evangelical missionary, building house churches. Today, I'm a atheist, a secular humanist. I've pretty much abandoned all of those beliefs. That transition, that transformation from one to the other, obviously involved incredible changes in beliefs, life views, basic moral, I grew up being taught, abortion is wrong, homosexuality is wrong. I've gone from being an abortion protester, working with groups that tried to do, reprogramming for homosexuals, things like this, to be an advocate on the other side now. we're talking radical transformations in a lot of my worldviews. On top of that, we haven't really mentioned this here yet, but I spent 25 years in China. Almost my entire adult life was in China. So going from Canadian culture to Chinese culture and all the changes that are involved in that. And like my passion, my specialty is culture. I always try to encourage everybody to go and spend time and actually live in another culture, not for what you learn about that other culture, but for what it teaches you about yourself. There's so many things in your own life. They're simply fundamental presuppositions that you have never even questioned. Like, of course, it's like this. That when you go to another culture, you start discovering, well, no, actually, it's not. There are other ways of looking at this, other ways of thinking about this, other ways of acting, other ways of reacting. So like as a broad general thing, I would say kind of the religious aspect and then the cultural aspect would have been the two areas of biggest change and transformation in my life. But then you've got like I moved from being a teacher to being an entrepreneur and businessman, another radical shift in life. Like my entire life up to this moment is about change, new experience. And if I live to 100, I hope I'll still be doing the same thing. I'll hope if we do this when I'm 90 years old, I'll be able to tell you about something completely new, completely radically different that I've just done. It's for me, that's what life is about.
Constant change, yes. Yes, as the philosopher said, you can never step in the same river twice. And this is one of the things that I think we all encounter as we age, that we go through transformations, and sometimes they're much more significant than we expected at the outset. For example, but before we get into that, I just want to, I can sense that we're going to go to a lot of places, and we're not going to finish this conversation in one sitting. So I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to come back and visit with us again.
Yeah, well, I had already talked with Omni. Like, as you can tell, once you get me going, it's pretty much impossible to shut me up. I can talk about anything for hours at a time. So, yeah, no problem at all.
And I also wanted to express gratitude to our sponsor, L'Artiste Design, who's made a contribution that enabled us to afford the software for this podcast. Thank you very much to L'Artiste. And if anyone else wants to become a sponsor or partner, we're open for that. And we also love to hear from you with any questions that are provoked by what you hear here, any observations or feedback, or if you want to suggest anyone else who you'd like to see on the podcast, that would be very welcome as well. Back to our conversation, John. Speaking of radical transformations, one of the things that has happened to you is that you became a father at 50.
Yes. Yeah. I think a general pattern in my life is I don't do anything the normal way. If there's an easy way and a hard way, I'll choose the hard way. So, yeah, I didn't get married until my mid-40s. Didn't have my first child until I was 50 years old, which. Yeah, I kind of look at it on the one side. There are probably significant milestones in my son's life that I may not be there for. On the other hand, I am a far better father than I would have been when I was younger. I've got experience, I've got maturity. When I look back at my own father, looking at it from the perspective of a older person, a father now, I see tons of things when I was younger that he did that were because he was young, because he was inexperienced, and I'm able to avoid a lot of that. I actually think I'm doing a pretty damn good job as a father. So,
yes, my own experience of fatherhood is that I seem to be learning at least as much from my son as I was contributing myself. And now that I'm older and he's older, I seem to be learning a lot more from him than he ever learns or has learned from me. Have you also had that experience at all?
I would say he's only 8 years old right now, so we're not quite at. I anticipate more once he hits his teens, and my wife fears it. I'm actually looking forward to it. It's kind of the age group that I actually tend to do the best with. I do a lot of work with high school students. Yeah, but I will say he does have fairly severe ADHD. So the way he looks at the world and experiences the world is very different. And I love it. I love talking with them, trying to understand, like, when he does something that seems like completely off the wall. Yeah, I just don't understand it at all. Sit down and talk with him and, like, well, what's going on in your head? Why are you doing it this way? What is the thinking process? Things like that.
That's really interesting, and that's another topic that we love to explore here is neurodivergence. For example, in my case, I was just diagnosed with ADHD at age 63, and it's overwhelming. And when I think, how different my life would have been if I was diagnosed at an earlier age and had some assistance or ability to understand why I was different from other people, and I think that makes a huge difference. So I think your son is very fortunate to know from an early age, and to have you to discuss those things with him. But I think, another side of that, of course, is that we're all different from each other. I saw something recently on YouTube that talked about the mental model that we have of another person and that they have of us. And that, in fact, when we're thinking about that other person, we're actually thinking about the mental model that we have in our heads, and how that can often be formed prematurely. For example, if we have an exposure to that person that is not favorable, or that we think is somebody that we think is that person that is not favorable, then our reaction to that person is going to be very different from if it is a favorable exposure.
Yeah, but I think with that, it doesn't matter how well you know someone. There is no human being on the planet you are ever going to have an accurate mental model of.
Not even yourself.
That's right. That's right. No, even yourself. You've got your own personal biases, blind spots, everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, there's how you're impacted by other people's mental models of you. Like, in high school, I was the kid that everybody picked on. I was an outsider. Very, very insecure, lacking in self-confidence. And today I'm a 100% completely different person. But if I go back and talk with some of the people that I went to high school with, I find myself automatically kind of slipping back a little bit into how they see me, the person that they knew in high school. There's just so many different ways that this impacts us. And actually, this is where, for me, like I talked about before about critical thinking, one of the most important parts of critical thinking is not like how to look at information. It's actually, first of all, understanding yourself, our own biases, the way, like, our own mind tricks us. The very way that we perceive the world is not completely accurate. We're being tricked. We're being fooled. We see things, experience things that seem real to us, but they're not. So first of all, being able to understand yourself, how you are experiencing the world, and this, neurodivergence comes into this as well, because the experience of the world is in a different way. So yeah, that's that whole thing is another subject by itself.
And of course, this also reflects our relationship with AI and LLMs and how they can hallucinate and interpret reality very differently from what we do. Even though on the surface, it may seem that they're interpreting in the same way, because we're all coming together in some sort of a forum and trying to connect with each other despite all of these fundamental differences. We have a lot of ground left to explore, John. But we're about to close for today. So I wanted to ask, if you had one message for our community today, what would that be?
I guess it'd pretty much come back to the thing of like always be learning, always be looking for new experiences. I see, particularly coming back to Canada. I left Canada as a 26-year-old. I came back in my mid 50s. You know, talking with other people, I have an extremely difficult time building relationships with people my age in Canada, because for the most part, their perspectives are like so self-limiting. It's kind of like, I've reached this point in my life. The stuff before is stuff that I know, but the stuff that's coming up, I just don't understand that. I can't understand that. Making life changes becomes much more intimidating. And I can understand that, but to me, I have more knowledge, more experience, everything. All of those changes, new challenges are easier for me now than they were when I was in my mid 20s, because I have so much more experience, knowledge, everything backing them up. So rather than it being an impediment to me trying all these new challenges, learning all these new things, it should be the opposite. Like, this is the best time in my life to be doing that.
Amazing. To our viewers, we have been talking with John Lombard, and this has been an incredible preface to what I'm sure will be an amazing continuing conversation over hopefully several opportunities to reconnect. John, I really enjoyed our connection today, and I love living in Vancouver, where you have a multitude of people coming together in one city and building something together, as we're trying to do here, to build a community, to support each other, to learn from each other. I look forward to welcoming you back, John.
No, thanks for having me. I enjoy it.
Very nice to meet you. Ami, did you want to make any closing comments in our chat? Ami has pointed out that travels open up our views and expand our minds. Absolutely, and conveys her thanks to you, John.
Yeah.
Hope to see you soon.
I do a lot of talking with high school students where like my number one message is, even before you go to university, spend a year overseas. Go experience another culture.
Thanks very much to our community and to all of you listening. And I look forward to hearing your feedback, comments, suggestions, everything you have to say to us. Thanks for listening.